on Monday Mindshare, and my question for you all today is, have you bonked yet? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because we got an email from a new customer recently, and the first question they had for us is, how do I use your product so I don't have to bonk in training? And for those of you not familiar with the word, of course, we're talking about bonking, and we're talking meaning that we're saying essentially hitting the wall, bonking, crashing is different kind of words to explain it. But essentially when muscle and liver glycogen is essentially exhausted and the body actually begins to lose, if you will, control, physical control, muscular control. And, you've probably seen videos of this and images of this, but I mean this in the most sincere way. I hope you have experienced it. I really hope you have experienced it. And best to experience it, of course, in training, but for a lot of people, this is experienced in racing. And I also saw this week after Dan Plu's amazing sub 8-hour Ironman and using one gel on the run, there was a number of comments on social media about, well, imagine what speed he would have done if he had taken a whole lot of gels during the run. And again, just a lack of education on, what is actually happening from a metabolic optimization perspective in training. And then in Dan's case, what he does on the bike and then what he does on the run to, create these world-class times and outcomes. Yesterday, Zach Bitter finished 100 miles, top 5 at Javelin 100 in 13 hours 34 for 100 miles, and did all of that with 40 grams of carbohydrate per hour. So optimizing the aerobic system, this is for endurance sport one of the most fundamental pillars of our performance outcomes. One of the whole reasons for training is to drive adaptations that is in line with the competition that we're targeting. And in our case, endurance sport, that means, of course, extended periods of time where metabolism is providing fuel and energy to support that, extended period of physical exercise. And as we've said before in many of the other podcasts and, videos we've done, if you look at the research, you'll find a number of references that one of the, only two, but one of the most determinant factors of those two for performance outcomes in endurance sport is fat oxidation efficiency. And the key tenet of building the aerobic system, of course, is for the body to get extremely efficient at burning fat at that aerobic intensity. And that is the preferred fuel at that intensity. Now, I would go as far as arguing that getting close to bonking in our zone 2 training sessions is one of the more potent methods to maximize aerobic development. I chose my words carefully there. I'm not, sadistic and wishing people to, get to that level where you're bonking, but close to that is important because this is where you're really triggering and really forcing the body to develop and build metabolic machinery that helps to fuel itself in that kind of training and intensity, which again aligns to the target competition we're talking about. This is about improving the capillarization of muscles. This is about increasing the number of mitochondria. This is about improving the efficiency of mitochondria. This is about improving the transport of fatty acids from fat tissue to muscle tissue. This is about the transport of fat into and the enzymes to break it down from long-chain fatty acids into medium-chain triglycerides in the cells. This is about the oxidation of fat. All of those elements are really potently stimulated and triggered, and the body and the metabolism grows as a function of these long zone 2 efforts. We had, athletes who have gone from, being CrossFit athletes to becoming world champion age group Ironman athletes, and some of the more extreme sessions that they would do for this was 8-hour fasted rides, and this would drive a dramatic shift in the efficiency of the body to handle fat oxidation. We were just talking to one of the up and coming pros, Christian Davy, in the base building part of his season, 25 to 30 hours a week. Most of that is done in zone 1 and zone 2, and increasingly of that is done in a more carbohydrate depleted state. So I do want to talk this morning just about that, how to maximize that shift, and talking about this, as I say, getting close to that bonking experience. And obviously with something like this, it is definitely better to do indoors, meaning on your trainer, on the treadmill, or what have you, so that obviously if you're getting very close to that point of bonking, that you can step off, obviously, if you need to. But this really, from a methodology perspective, starts best the night before, and even the session before, the afternoon session before, where you could do a more higher intensity, shorter session the night before. So you're having some level of glycogen exhaustion that night before, and then the dinner that night after that afternoon session could be lower in carbohydrate, but still, material amounts of protein and fat. And so you're still getting a caloric load, but you're really not, if you will, replenishing all of the liver and muscle glycogen. And then overnight, when you obviously get up in the morning and you line up for your morning session, you are begin that session in a slightly depleted state. And that doesn't mean that on the morning of this long zone 2 session, aerobic session, that you couldn't still also have something like some protein or fat, more for the satiety, or basically feeling satisfied, and something just in your stomach. There's many ways you can do that. We talk about the use of our breakfast cereal, our Life Bar product. And for a lot of athletes, that is the way that they would, go into a zone 2 session, or obviously some caffeine, whether it's coffee or tea or what have you, or our SFuels Prime. And I'll talk more about Prime in a second. Now, you should be doing this and getting experience with that close to bonking workout, zone 2 workout. You should ultimately getting used to doing these, separately or discreetly, if you will, on the bike, and then secondly, doing this for run sessions. And I say that because I do see, even in lab data, quite a lot of differentiation between how the body's metabolism runs in aerobic zone 2 context on the bike and on the treadmill can be quite different. So I think it's important that you set up training sessions and, frankly, periods of time for that session for both a bike and a run, so that you get a sense for how your body handles fuel 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours into a session, and what kind of fuel can bring you close to that, where that bonking feeling. Now, these sessions in length probably do need to be 2.5 to 3 hours in duration. And the reason for that is very simply is that generally your muscle and liver, from a storage capacity perspective, can really only hold that much glycogen, whereby if you are to exercise for that period of time, you would, generally speaking, and it's a general guideline, exhaust most of that liver and muscle glycogen. And that's where obviously you're beginning to get close to that feeling of bonking. What I've seen very good, and I would recommend athletes to participate more in, is the Endure IQ, weekend rides Saturday morning US time, I guess it is. I think there's a midweek one also. These are group rides on Zwift, and particularly the Saturday session is like, mostly it's 2 to 4 hours in duration. And a lot of those sessions, I mean, they're purpose built to be zone 2 aerobic sessions mostly. And but most of those sessions would also have 30 to 60 minutes into the ride, a small set of intervals, 6 to 10 intervals of around 30 seconds each, thereabouts, and then typically 30 seconds rest. But they're high intensity intervals. And again, the purpose of that is to further in that overall 2 to 3 hour, 4 hour training session, is that you're going to have some of these intervals up front in the session to help further exhaust some of that muscle and liver glycogen. And, after those intervals, the session would continue in classic, aerobic zone 2 intensity, whatever that is for you with your respective FTP on your bike, or whatever that is for you in terms of, speed on a treadmill. Now, with that training session, when we talk about nutrition for this, like I said, prior to the session, adding some protein and fat is fine just to feel satisfied. Some caffeine is fine to get you mentally, ready. And frankly, you will actually manage from a perceived exertion perspective this zone 2 session much better with some caffeine. You probably need 50 to 80 milligrams of caffeine prior to the session. I suggest half an hour to 60 minutes before the session. Then when you get into the session itself, this should be done with our SFuels Train product in terms of a 0 carbohydrate product, and where it still provides some non-glycogenic fuels, and glutamine and the MCT are the two fuels in Train that still provide the body with some, not a lot, but some fuel. And then as you get into the session, you should be thinking about using Train in the 1 to 2 serves per hour. So if you've got a 4-hour session, that could be 4 serves of that, and typically most folks just space that across in terms of having a bike bottle for each 60 to 90 minutes of the training program. Now, as it relates to using SFuels primed in these sessions, generally my guidance would be to use or get the concentration of the caffeine and the L-carnitine early on in the session, because there's 2 things you're trying to do. Is the caffeine is trying to upregulate, of course, fat oxidation even further. And the L-carnitine, you really want that to be loaded into the muscle early on in the session. And by having the caffeine and the L-carnitine together with the beginning of the session, you're basically, as the intensity and the muscle contractions happen in that first 30 to 60 minutes, you begin to open up the channels that supports nutrition coming into the muscle cell. And that, particularly for L-carnitine, you do want to be doing this with, in exercise, during exercise, so that those channels are opening up and allows that particular amino acid to come into the muscle and to support the loading of L-carnitine into the muscle. And we just did some videos on that to talk about how it further facilitates the transport of fat from outside of the muscle cell and inside to the inner membrane and into the mitochondria for oxidation. So I would encourage athletes not to look for ways to avoid bonking in training, and this is again specific to the long zone 2 ones, but really seeking to set up those sessions so that you can get close to that feeling. And you'll feel it like as you get into that 2 to 3 hour session, and if you set your training session up like we've just talked about and your nutrition up like we've just talked about, you will feel it as you get into that 2 to 3 hour period. As you get more efficient, that may end up being longer, or it will be longer. It'll be 3 hours out, 4 hours out, where you'll begin to feel the weakness, And there can be some mental fatigue that comes with that also. It doesn't hurt to take some more caffeine later in the session. But that is the feeling that you want to get to, and where there is a very real just malaise and fatigue that comes with exhausting muscle glycogen. I hope that you find that interesting. I think it's one of the really more potent ways for endurance athletes to really shift that metabolism, to set them up for great performances in racing in the year ahead. And if you do have any questions, by all means, send us a note. We're happy to do one-on-ones. We're doing a lot of them these days to help athletes really optimize and tune those sessions. I would encourage you also to take a look at Dan's EndureIQ training and his squad. That further provides an avenue for a question, Q&A, and backwards and forwards from Dan and the team there. And between his training, master work, and our work here at SFuels, I think we'll get you on the right track. Thanks again. Have a great week in training. And as always, go longer. Thanks again.